Everyone thought the electric car war was already decided. Tesla owned innovation, BYD owned scale, and every other automaker seemed stuck trying to catch up in a race built around one thing: bigger batteries. For years, that was the entire conversation. Longer range, faster charging, lower battery costs. Whoever solved batteries first would control the future. But behind the scenes, something strange was happening inside Mercedes. Not a flashy announcement, not a massive marketing campaign, just a quiet engineering project most people ignored at first, and now. Some people inside the auto industry believe that project could force the entire EV market to rethink what actually matters, because Mercedes may have realized something before everyone else did. What if batteries were never the real bottleneck? The scary part is, they've apparently been preparing for this moment for years. A few years ago, the EV industry looked simple from the outside. Every company was chasing the same goal: build a bigger battery, push more range, make charging faster. Tesla proved electric cars could actually be exciting. BYD flooded the market with cheaper production at massive scale. Other companies rushed to catch up however they could, and consumers started thinking range was everything. If one car could drive 500 kilometers and another could drive 700, the answer seemed obvious. Bigger number wins. But engineers inside the industry knew the problem wasn't that simple. Because every time you increase battery size, something else gets worse. Weight increases, cooling becomes harder, packaging becomes tighter, efficiency drops, the car gets heavier, larger, and more complicated, and eventually, companies started running into the same invisible wall. You can't keep making everything bigger forever. That's when a tiny engineering company called YASA started asking a dangerous question. What if the future of EV performance had less to do with batteries and more to do with the motor itself? At first, almost nobody outside engineering circles cared. Electric motors weren't exciting, they weren't flashy, most consumers never even thought about them. But YASA's idea was different enough that engineers quietly started paying attention. Traditional EV motors followed a design the industry already understood well: reliable, proven, easy to scale. But they also came with a trade-off. More power usually meant more size and more weight. And in electric vehicles, space is everything. Every extra kilogram matters. Every centimeter matters, because inside an EV, everything fights for space at the same time. Batteries, cooling systems, suspension, cabin layout, electronics. So, YASA started building something that sounded almost unrealistic. A smaller motor capable of producing extreme power density, not through magic, through a completely different design philosophy. And this is where the story starts getting uncomfortable for the rest of the industry. Because if they were right, then the EV race was about to change direction completely. Most EVs today use what's called a radial flux motor. The easiest way to imagine it is like a thick, spinning cylinder. Magnetic force moves outward from the center, creating rotation. It works well. The industry understands it. It's everywhere, but YASA focused on something called axial flux design. Instead of force moving outward, it moves front to back. The shape changes completely. Instead of a thick drum, the motor becomes more like a thin disc, and that single design change created a possibility. That got Mercedes interested very quickly. More power and less space, less weight without sacrificing performance, better packaging inside the car. At first, this sounded like one of those engineering concepts that works beautifully in theory but fails in reality, because the auto industry is full of brilliant ideas that never survive production. But Mercedes didn't walk away from it. They quietly moved closer, and eventually they bought YASA outright. That move confused a lot of people at the time because Mercedes wasn't dominating headlines in EVs the way Tesla was. They weren't flooding markets like BYD either. So why spend years investing in motor technology most consumers didn't even understand? The answer may have been much bigger than people realized. Mercedes wasn't trying to win today's EV race. They may have been preparing for the next one, because batteries eventually become easier to copy. Charging speeds improve across the entire industry. Software advantages narrow over time. But the actual driving experience, the feeling of performance, the way power is delivered, that's much harder to replicate. And Mercedes understood something important about luxury buyers. They don't just buy specifications, they buy feeling. A lighter car feels different. A more responsive drivetrain feels different. A vehicle that delivers massive torque without adding excessive weight changes the entire experience behind the wheel. And suddenly, YASA wasn't just a motor company anymore, it became part of Mercedes' long-term survival strategy. But this only matters once you see what happened next. Because the moment axial flux technology entered the mainstream conversation, it quietly created pressure on two companies that had dominated the EV world for years. Tesla and BYD. Tesla built its reputation around drivetrain efficiency, software, and acceleration. For years, their motors were considered one of the company's biggest competitive strengths. But if Mercedes can produce a luxury performance EV that feels lighter, faster, smoother, and more refined using axial flux motors, then Tesla's identity as the engineering leader suddenly becomes vulnerable, especially in the premium segment. And BYD faces a completely different threat, because BYD's dominance depends heavily on battery manufacturing scale and cost efficiency. But what happens if future EVs no longer need massive battery packs to achieve strong performance? What happens if smarter motor systems extract more value from smaller batteries? That changes the economics of the entire industry. And now the competition starts shifting away from one simple question: who builds the biggest battery? Toward a much more dangerous one: who builds the best machine? But there's a major problem nobody likes talking about. This technology is incredibly difficult to scale, and that may decide whether this becomes the future, or just another expensive experiment. Because building one impressive prototype is easy. Building millions of reliable units is where companies fail. Axial flux motors introduce serious manufacturing challenges. Heat management becomes harder. Production precision becomes more demanding. Supply chains become more fragile. Rare materials create additional pressure. Even small cost increases become massive problems at scale. And Mercedes knows this better than anyone, because luxury customers don't tolerate unreliable technology for very long. A breakthrough means nothing if it fails after years of real-world use. That's why Mercedes stayed quiet for so long. They weren't just developing performance, they were trying to solve survivability. And honestly, this may be the most important part of the entire story, because right now, nobody truly knows whether axial flux motors will dominate the next generation of EVs. Maybe they stay limited to expensive AMG performance models. Maybe production costs remain too high. Maybe traditional motor designs continue, improving fast enough to compete. Or maybe this becomes one of those rare moments where the industry changes direction before most people even realize it happened. History says it's possible. Airbags once belonged only to luxury cars. Touchscreens once felt futuristic. ABBs, braking once sounded unnecessary, and now they exist everywhere. The same thing could happen here, 5 or 10 years from now. People may look back and realize the EV revolution didn't change because batteries got bigger. It changed because someone finally figured out how to do more with less. And if that happens, then the companies that spent years obsessing over battery size may discover they were solving the wrong problem all along. Which leaves one final question. If Mercedes is right about motor technology becoming the next battlefield, then what else is the entire industry focusing on right now that could suddenly become obsolete next? The strange part is that Mercedes may not even be the only company thinking this way anymore. Because once one major automaker starts chasing a new engineering direction, everyone else starts paying attention very quickly, not publicly. Publicly, companies stay confident. They keep talking about battery breakthroughs, software updates, production numbers, and charging networks. But internally, things change fast. Engineers notice patterns long before consumers do, and inside the EV world, there's growing awareness that the next major advantage may come from efficiency underneath the car, not just flashy numbers on paper. That changes everything. Because for years, the EV market rewarded one thing above all else: scale. Build more batteries. Lower costs. Increase production. That strategy helped Tesla dominate headlines and helped BYD become a manufacturing giant. But now another possibility is entering the conversation. What if future EV leadership belongs to whichever company builds the smartest system instead of the biggest battery? That idea becomes especially dangerous for companies competing in the premium market. Because luxury buyers don't always care about the same things mass market buyers do. At a certain point, almost every EV becomes quick. Almost every EV gets large screens. Almost every EV eventually reaches acceptable range. So then what separates them? The feeling. And Mercedes has spent decades building its entire identity around that word. The way the steering responds, the way acceleration feels at high speed, the way weight transfers through corners, the silence inside the cabin, the smoothness of power delivery.